First of all, welcome everybody. And I'm Emiliano Ippoliti from the Department of Philosophy at Sapienza University of Rome. And I would like to thank you all for attending this Finance Online Seminar, which is the first of a series of seminars organized by the nascent Philosophy and Finance Network, Finance in short. In this first meeting, we will discuss Donald Mackenzie's new book, Trading at the Speed of Light, published by Princeton University Press. And of course, I would like to thank Donald Mackenzie and the discussant for accepting our invitations. I'm very happy to start our seminars by presenting this new, exciting book by Donald. And before starting, I want to remind you of the format of the seminar. Donald will talk for about 20 minutes. And then the discussant will have a maximum of 12 minutes each for their comments. And finally, we will open the debate where everybody can ask questions. And please, just please keep your question reasonably brief so everybody has a chance to ask. You can ask your questions in the chat or directly in the video by raising your hand in the reaction menu of Zoom at the bottom right. And without further ado, I pass the word to Donald, who I thank again for being here. So thank you, Donald.
Yeah, and I, of course, thank you hugely, Emiliano, for organizing this event. I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you publish a book to have the chance to interact with colleagues who understand the subject area very well. So I'm also very grateful to Bohi, to Robert, to Christian, and to Daniel for being my discussants. And I'm going to try to be very brief, possibly even less than 20 minutes. But I do actually want to start with just some other thanks to people, you know, not just to the immediate discussants, but to the little group of us that over the years have shared a research interest in high frequency trading, which certainly has included Bohi, Robert, Christian, Daniel, albeit rather briefly, but also some people who I think may not be here. Daniel Solilis from the Copenhagen group, and Christina Lange from that group, who did really superb ethnographic fieldwork on high frequency trading. And one of the delights of the early years of the project was discovering Anne Christina and discovering the truly remarkable fieldwork that she had conducted. Alexandre Lemonnier, again, a name well known to anybody who works in high frequency trading, but perhaps not so well known outside it. Alexandra's had a blog called Sniper in Mawo, which is a reference to one of the main data centers in which high frequency trading is conducted. And if you can read French, I would enormously recommend Alexandra's book, 4, that's just the title, Quatre, 4. This is a simple one character title. It's a terrific book. And then perhaps finally, again, someone who's not here, Eric Budish, Chicago economist, both whose work and personally I found enormously helpful to mine in this area. I mean, if you work in economic sociology, you're used to people having very stereotyped impressions of economists and what they're like. And whenever I encounter that, mentally, the image of Eric floats into my brain as a counter to the stereotypes of economists. So a little bit perhaps now about the start of the book, which goes way back to 2010. I always greatly admire those scholars who start out their research with a clear-cut hypothesis, who have a theory that they're attempting to test, but that, of course, I'm afraid, is not me. I typically start with just an instinct that the topic area is of interest, but then gradually find out what's interesting about it. You know, so if you're, as I am, if you come from science and technology studies and you're interested in markets, then high frequency trading just was the kind of topic that sparks your interest. And that's really how it began. And precisely because it started with no more than a sort of vague sense that it would be interesting to find out more about high frequency trading, the finding out did take a rather long time, took essentially 10 years. And that's maybe something worth just pausing to say something about. One thing I think I've already indicated that I think academia should be about, but isn't always, that's collegiality. And as I say, I particularly valued the collegiality of my fellow researchers on high frequency trading. The other thing that academia should be about is slow work as well as fast work, because I've always found that ideas take time to form. The slow work has actually been fun. It's been a little bit like assembling a jigsaw. You find a little piece, and then a little while later you find another piece, and you slot it all in, and gradually a picture starts to coalesce. But of course, I've been very dependent on my interviewees for giving me those pieces, especially those of them who were prepared to speak to me many, many times. There are two people, as I record in the book, there are two people, two interviewees who each allowed themselves to be interviewed 9 times by me. And it wasn't boring and it wasn't repetitive. I was learning new stuff each time. And that's one of the little methodological lessons I draw for myself out of this work, that there is real value in going back to the same person. I think Daniel, this is one of the themes of Daniel's new book as well. The framework in which I fit those pieces of the jigsaw, I call material political economy. And I want to say a few words about each of those things. So first of all, material. I am emphatically not trying to draw an ontological distinction between the material and the non-material. For me, materiality is a kind of heuristic. It's a rule of thumb that tells you what to look at and what aspects to look at, including aspects that are often overlooked. When I say materiality, I'm also not referring simply to particles that have mass. So light and other forms of electromagnetic radiation, those are material for me. So materiality is a heuristic it's also, in a sense, an aesthetic. It's something that seems to me to be an important part of the pictures that we should draw of our fieldwork sites. One of the many reasons I love Le Monier's book, Quatre, is that on the cover, there is a quotation about rain. It put in English, it's, if it rains in Chicago, then prices change in New Jersey. And that's, of course, a very striking aspect of modern financial markets, that they should be disrupted by rain. Or another little bit of the field work that gave me a certain aesthetic delight, and I know, Daniel, that you found this striking as well, is bird drop. The use of lasers, atmospheric lasers, to transmit prices in New Jersey, lasers on top tall towers or high buildings in the open air. And of course, if something is in the open air, birds do their thing and some of it drops on them. And the really quite substantial problem it was to find a coating for those lasers, which meant that they would not be blinded by bird drop. And the discovery that honey was the best substitute in tests for the consistency of bird drop. So materiality, it's a heuristic, it's an aesthetic sensitivity. Political, the second of the words. I, of course, do take, as we all, I think, now do, a broad notion of politics and the political, but I do also actually want to examine the role of politics in the narrower sense, the sense of political parties, of Congress, even of electoral calculations. And it took me a long time to disentangle this, but you can actually see effects of the political system in the United States on high-frequency trading. And then finally, the third word, economic. That's intended as a corrective to the fact that our field, the social studies of finance, it's sometimes called, people studying financial markets not from the viewpoint of economics or individualistic behavioral finance, but from broader social science perspectives, that we often haven't done very much about money, the way money is made in the financial system. And it may in part be because that has seemed either too obvious, because it's finance, so it's bound to be about money, or because it's thought, well, economists cover money. But one of the virtues, from my viewpoint, of researching high-frequency trading is that high-frequency trading challenges existing ways of making money in financial markets, and in so doing makes those visible. And in particular, makes the element of rent in financial markets visible. Now, on the one hand, it is certainly true that HFT, the net effect of HFT has almost definitely been to reduce rents, the rents that well-placed intermediaries used to be able to earn. But HFT itself does also involve rent. And one of the reasons I particularly like Eric Budish's work is the way in which he puts his finger, he and his colleagues put their fingers directly on the element of rent-seeking competition that's involved in high-frequency trading. Now, I do, of course, have to acknowledge that there is idiosyncrasy to high-frequency trading. There's idiosyncrasy to the materiality of high-frequency trading. In the book, I call that materiality Einsteinian, and it's not to suggest that you actually need to understand special relativity in order to understand high-frequency trading, but it's to point to the way in which the speed of light in a vacuum is for high-frequency trading not just a theoretical limit, but a practical matter, a practical constraint. And I don't actually know any other sphere of human economic activity in which the speed of light is a constraint in quite the same sense as it is in high-frequency trading. So there is idiosyncrasy. But at the very end of the book, I consider two other areas where I think one can also see the virtues of a material political economy approach. One is Bitcoin mining, where there's a similar rent-seeking competition, but not in raw speed as there is in high-frequency trading, but in total computational power. And I think it's by now well understood that is one of the major drawbacks of Bitcoin, that a competition in total computational power means a disproportionate and huge consumption of electricity, much of it, alas, still generated by coal-fired power stations. Obvious environmental drawbacks. The other area, and this is the one in which that I've started to work on now that the book is finished, is online advertising. In some senses quite similar, but again, the competition does not take the form of a simple speed race, because the auctions that are triggered when you visit a news website or search for something of commercial interest on Google, what's triggered is a single point in time auction in which algorithms have 100 or 120 milliseconds, I beg your pardon, 100 to 120 milliseconds to bid. And of course, anybody who studied high frequency trading hears that and thinks, my God, that's an eternity. That's a lifetime, 100 milliseconds. But you time out of that auction and you're out of that particular game. And so some of the issues of location and materiality in that sense do still matter in online advertising. Similarly, the material interaction between the user, their device, the web server or other service they are using, and the ad server that generates the ads, that material interaction is of great centrality to the field. And parts of that material interaction involve things that really have surprised me. I mean, I knew, of course, of Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, so some of the elements of collection of data weren't surprising, but I was genuinely surprised to discover that my phone sometimes conducts auctions for my attention. Okay, that's it. I hope I got under 20. I hope I got under 20 minutes. So I will be quiet and look forward to what's going to be the fun bit for me, is to hearing what the four of you think. Thank you.
So thank you, Donald. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now Daniel should step in, I guess. And so thank you, Daniel, for your comment.
Thank you, Emiliano, and thank you, Donald, as well. Thanks to the two of you for inviting me to discuss here Donald's book. Surely it's a testament to the stature of Donald's figure that normally when a book author faces discussants, the author might be nervous, but in this case, surely is the commenter, the discussant myself, who is nervous to see what is Donald's reaction going to be. But I'm going to keep it hopefully brief. And some of what I'm going to mention are things that Donald has already heard or read, of my own views on the book. The book, there's no question, is a monumental scholarly achievement, and I truly cannot wait to see the scholarly ripples that I anticipate it is going to create. You have all heard Donald's presentation, and so I will not repeat his points about material, the political and the economy, but I will, however, make references to this framework here and there. So to me, the most important contribution made by the book lies, as Donald himself points out, in the material. And I think that more than any other study so far, Trading at the Speed of Light delivers on what was, in my view, the initial promise of the social studies of finance, which was to incorporate the material in the analysis of financial markets. And so, over the past more than 2 decades, multiple studies have incorporated the use of tools, including models, tickers, monitors, other algorithms. But somehow the show is always stolen by larger-than-life people, such as Fisher Black, Robert Merton, Leo Melamed. And so the end result is that the social studies of finance somehow remains trapped within the broader discipline of economic sociology. And it seems as if markets are really, at the end, that they come down to people, even if what they do can be provided with greater color through the tools. But after Trading at the Speed of Light, this is resolutely not the case. And as Donald himself pointed out, what we see in this book is a world made up of fog, rain, bird drops, honey, fighter jets, and one of the elements that has always captured my imagination is this analogy to physics and the Einsteinian frame that Donald offers. And doing so, what it did to a reader like myself is truly placing me somehow in the position of somebody who is staring with wonder at something almost for the first time, and trying to grapple what it means to think about an object that has microscopic dimensions, but also for which a microscopic scale is equally relevant. So the nanosecond, millisecond, and then try to make sense of it all. So, because of the material emphasis of Trading at the Speed of Light, I truly experienced reading it something that was deeply moving and somehow almost unsettling, the way that it is when one confronts something genuinely new. First time I saw a trading floor, first time I typed on a microcomputer. And so I wanted to take the occasion to propose or perhaps underscore a few paradoxes and puzzles, conundrums that came to me as I read the book on the materiality of markets. So one, for instance, is that the breaking up of market actions in the sense that what HFT does is it breaks up the size of orders into very, very small orders. Does paradoxically not result in atomized markets the way that economists have presented them, but somehow recombines in creating markets that are shaped by crowds, such as markets under flash events. Here's another paradox that as much as technology was originally introduced to dominate over nature, when it comes to technological races, as in the case of HFT algorithms that change the performance of the market when there is rain, when it comes to technological races, instead of dominating nature, nature ends up resurfacing again and dominating the market and the market participants. The attempts to eliminate what an economist would call quasi-rents or rents, such as those obtained by the specialist on the New York Stock Exchange, paradoxically does not result in the elimination of such rents, but just in the reduction on the rents at the same time as the recreation of different type of rents, such as the ones that are being charged by the users of the cables or the antennae that are especially placed to produce speed. And so clearly what Donald does in the book is manage to present all the unexpected ways and paradoxical outcomes of this very strong role of materiality in HFT. And so I would also like to emphasize a few elements that struck me as particularly shocking of the political dimension of Donald's frame. So again, reading the book and coming to grips with markets that in which a material asset rather than efficiency was shaping outcomes, led me to begin to rethink my own political postulates and sometimes friendly ambivalence to the financial sector, and to start thinking about how many other ways is financial innovation through technology, not a form of scientific process, but as a fence to protect the privilege of those who are deriving rents. And so in this regard, I think it's worth going back to the utopian element of the early writing in economics about automating markets, as well as the original plans of the founders of Island, the dominant electronic communication network, and how, keep in mind that really the project of automating markets in this way was very much a utopian project. And then it's important to pause and take a look at where things are at this time. And the entire circular movement that goes from markets that were being intermediated through discrete auctions a century ago, and for which the gradual move to introduce greater continuity in time by making systems more and more responsive have paradoxically led to a situation where there are calls such as Buddhish's call to reform the market by introducing discrete auctions. And so yet another paradox and another circular movement where at the end of this long process of investment in technology, the proposals are to go back to the way that auctions were being, variation on the way in which auctions were being held century ago. And so, so to me, what the book really brings up is these many ways in which the introduction of material brings back the political into the market, but in unexpected, paradoxical, roundabout, and oftentimes self-defeating ways. And so the question that then I am left with is what are then what are we to make of all this complex, convoluted, and wonderful story at the end of the day? And so to me, what I essentially get out of the book is a framework and a lens to think about material markets and to bring back the political element, and to think about other instances where material dynamics are bringing disputes, conflict, politics. And so, for instance, now my current research is looking at how organizations deal with disruption and crisis, and how in the process of recovering from disruption, which often entails rebuilding the material setup that has been destroyed, organizations are facing again the conflicts and the disputes that they settled when they decided to create technology in this or that manner. And so the destruction then brings again to the surface disputes that had been left behind. And so competing interests, material and technological issues, and the political dynamics that are around, that exist around those, it's very much in the spirit of Donald's frame for the book, the material political economy. So to conclude, it's a phenomenal scholarly achievement, and I think that it will be influencing thinking about markets for years to come. And thank you, Donald, for enlightening us in this manner about HFT.
So thank you, Daniel, for your interesting and stimulating comments. And now I will pass the word to Hee. So thank you, Hee, for being here and for what you are going to say.
Okay, I want to reciprocate my thank you to Emiliano for including me as part of this event, and I also want to thank Donald for bringing this fascinating book to the world, and I really enjoyed reading the book. To repeat what Daniel just said, there's no doubt that this book will be a foundational work that both academics and practitioners can build on for their understanding of the financial markets or for their scholarly studies. This book, as Donald said, this book presents the material political economy as a central concept. And he presents an integrative analysis of the financial markets as the manifestation of the material political economy. Donald does an impressive work of disentangling the financial market, which is complex and then composed of a myriad of human actors and technological systems, and interacting with one another to under the material politics that contributed to the shaping of the market. And then, of course, we know Donald's previous work, and he has convincingly shown repeatedly that social and the material are fused in finance. And this book presents the product of this fusion in the form of material politics that is centered on the one empirical phenomenon called the war of speed, the speed war or latency war, and so on. So contrary to many people's perception, or as portrayed in popular media, this speed war is not necessarily technological, as he shows. It's actually a manifestation of underlying politics. And then that at the same time serves as infrastructure that shapes the market participation. So we know that in the floor trading, the people had limited access to the market information or participation in trading because of the physical limitations. But we also, Donald also shows that even with electronic markets, because of the latency, that there's a time window that someone can participate in the market or take advantage in terms of the time. The limitation on the market participation can also be present, albeit in a different form. So he does a truly impressive work of synthesizing historical analysis and extensive ethnographic fieldwork to piece together the detailed roles and these stakeholders, market participants, regulators, and trading venues played in shaping the material political economy, both at the micro, meso, and macro level. So you can see what seems to be a small material element, which he calls mundane materiality, play an important role and have a significant effect how market participants can do their mundane business, which is trading. And for example, that's we can see in the changes in tick size and how it fueled the competition among trading venues for order flows, or the changes in the internal material system, technological systems that market participants had to engage in to address what seems to be a small changes in the world, in the financial world. So, so he also showed that regulatory intervention played a key role as defining what material arrangements are allowed and what not. These material interventions enabled socio-technical arrangements among trading venues, upon which market participants developed different cognitive and technological specialization as based on making and taking different roles in terms of the market. So what I found interesting about that is that while these market participants, which he building on the field theory, frames as the incumbents and the challengers. And whenever there's a challengers bring a new technology, they had to engage in with what we can see as a kind of legitimacy project. They have to gain legitimacy to the incumbents. Whether the new technology is by the incumbents, such as in the case of the CME and NeoMLML, or by new players, challengers, such as automated trading desk. So I could only, have question about this, the connection between legitimacy and the humanity. So it seems to me that whenever there's a new technology, new element of aspect, new element of materially introduced to the market, there's a resistance that centers around the legitimacy of the technology. So is there a connection between legitimacy and humanity? So materially, according to the views of the market participants or to the views of regulators, are there something that the material has to undermine legitimacy in the world previously organized as anthropocentric world, anthropocentric financial markets, trading floors with human specialists, but now we have automated algorithmic market makers. So sometimes the issue of legitimacy borders with the issue of legality, as we can see in the case of spoofing and sweeping. So I believe that spoofing existed in the form of manual spoofing, as Donald shows in the book. Also, it's not hard to imagine to having this sweeping behavior exists on the trading floor. However, it's only after the electronization of the markets and automation of those market actions that it became the subject of heated debate or heated debate about legitimacy or legality. So that was the one question that I had while reading this book. And then another thing possible, which is not a question per se, but more like an extension that I wanted to see, because I could only see that what I can build on, what I can do by building on the Donald's book. So it's that what would be the material politics in terms of the global landscape. So how do market participants, high frequency traders, navigate different material political economies? What I'm saying is that Borch, one of the companies that closely examined in Donald's book, according to his webpage, has business in 37 countries. So we can safely assume that some of these countries have different material political economies in terms of regulation, in terms of technological arrangements in the trading venues or the technologies that are allowed to market participants, or at least some behavior, market actions that are allowed. So having said that, how do market participants navigate different material political economies? Donald did examine the differences of the US market and the UK market. Also, he examined different markets of different asset classes, such as futures market versus the stock market. However, it was mostly about the different players playing in the operating in different areas, different markets. So how could particular market participants will navigate across the different economies or material political economies? This is actually personally motivated by my anecdotal experience. So while I was doing my master's fieldwork, I interviewed a South Korean high-risk trader in around 2011, 2012, and he complained about this one guy who was always the first in the market when the market opened. And that's when East Asian market traders are busy incorporating overnight developments in the US market and European market. And that he was sure that it was this one guy. Every day, he's the first in the market. And a few years later, I ran into a blog which called his company, a Western trader, which called his company an accidental high-frequency trader in South Korea. Why? Because his company was looking to expand the business into South Korea. At the time, Korea had the biggest futures market, bigger than Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And the firm was looking for a cheap office to run their programs for trading. And then the local rental agency offered a room in the same building as the exchange servers, because none of the local traders wanted the room, because the room had a lot of machines in the same building, so a lot of noises and no air conditioning. So there was no concept of collocation or latency for the local traders. But however, it was possible that the Western trading firm knew about it and knowingly or unknowingly exploited the different material political economic system that different countries have. So I was kind of curious, and then more like is how can we build on Donald's foundational work to explain these different material political economies and their impact on the market behaviors, market actions, or market participation, and so on. So to conclude, just to repeat, this is all I could think of reading this book was first that, oh, Donald has done everything what is left for me to do. After that initial phase, I was thinking that then what I can do what I can study by building on this foundational work. This gives me a lot of ideas and then the avenues to pursue in terms of my academic studies. So having said that, I believe that this is going to make a huge impact in the studies of social studies of finance or sociology of finance. I'm very much looking forward to people building on this research for their own scholarly endeavors. Okay, thank you.
And thank you very much, Bohi, for your interesting and stimulating comments. And now I will pass the word to Christian Borch from Copenhagen University too. And so thank you, Christian, for being here for discussing Donald's book.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for organizing this event, Emiliano, and for the invitation to take part in it. I want to begin by congratulating Donald on this new book. I think it's a really remarkable book and one that really elegantly brings together a number of key ideas from several papers that Donald has published on automated trading and HFT over the years. I think the book also further develops and extends some of Donald's central arguments, in particular in relation to material political economy. And this notion, which Donald already introduced earlier today, has been discussed in some of Mackenzie's papers over the past years, but I think this new book offers the most elaborate treatment of this notion and gives it the most in-depth treatment today. So I think this is really a core contribution of the book. I'll come back to that notion shortly and organize my comments around it. But before doing that, I want to emphasize another aspect that I really appreciate about this new book. So one of the things that I find really worth emphasizing is that the book is based on some really fantastically impressive empirical work. The book is based on no less than or more than 300 interviews, actually. And I want to emphasize this, not to advocate a kind of quantification of qualitative work. I guess that some of you are familiar with the recent discussion that has occurred concerning the journal Gender and Society, which apparently had some kind of internal rule that they would desk reject papers, or qualitative papers at least, that were based on less than 35 interviews. The journal was, in my view, rightly criticized for this policy and eventually softened that policy a bit. But I think one of the interesting things that came out of that discussion was a reminder that it's possible to do really solid qualitative work without trying to resemble the kind of large N that is so beloved by quantitative scholars. So obviously, Mackenzie wouldn't be trapped by Gender and Society's desk reject policies. That's pretty clear. But I want to stress that there is actually a strong virtue to Donald's extremely comprehensive qualitative work. So it's clear when reading the book that this is really an authoritative text. Donald's understanding of HFT is simply second to none. Also, the rich empirical data means that as a reader, you really feel that Donald has explored every possible corner of HFT. No stone has been left unturned. As a result, and even though I myself have been doing some work in this field over the years, I learned a lot from the book, and not least from its very detailed descriptions of HFT. As I said, I think one of the conceptual theoretical achievements of the book really concerns the notion of material political economy. So I want to focus my comments of each of the elements of this notion. So I'll have something to say about the materiality of automated trading, something about the politics pertaining to it, and also something about the ways in which Donald approaches the economy. And my first comment concerns materiality. I think that, and this was also clear from Donald's opening introduction, in the book, he convincingly shows that materiality is key to HFT and automated trading. So the race to get the response time of automated trading algorithms, their latency, down to the level of nanoseconds, that neatly captures the importance of materiality. But when I was reading the book and also comparing the data reported in it to my own fieldwork, there was one level of algorithmic materiality that I was surprised not to see more of, namely machine learning. Machine learning is being discussed in the book, but only on 2 or 3 occasions, I think, and only briefly. And Donald does note in the introduction that he had expected to see more machine learning use in the field, but that it turned out that machine learning was less central than he initially assumed it to be. My own impression is slightly different here. It's my sense that machine learning is actually increasingly being adopted in automated trading, including HFT. I think this has at least 2 important implications for the findings presented in Donald's new book. The first implication is that when used for automated trading purposes, the idea of machine learning is to have trading algorithms develop their own trading policies instead of having human traders conceiving of particular strategies and then implementing these strategies in code. So the idea of machine learning is that the algorithm should come up with its own trading policies independently of humans. And the consequence of this is that algorithmic trading systems would assume a much greater independence than human-defined trading systems. I think the reason why this is important in the context of Donald's book is that machine learning algorithms might provide an even stronger argument for a material political economy, since the market setting in which they are operative is one where humans are playing a relatively smaller role than in the HFT being discussed in the book. Now, obviously, this is raising also a number of new questions concerning legitimacy and legality, such as Borch also addressed in her comments. The second important implication of machine learning concerns signals, so the pieces of information that are guiding algorithms' decisions to place orders in markets. So in the book, Donald analyzes a range of important signals, including order book updates or the ways that changes in the price of futures contracts are used to inform share trading. Now, one of the interesting features of machine learning is how it potentially transforms the number and nature of relative or relevant signals. So for automated trading systems working on somewhat longer time horizons than HFTs, there's a clear indication that machine learning algorithms can find new types of signals in so-called alternative data. But I think there are also suggestions that even low latency trading systems or high frequency trading systems that are using natural language processing techniques can exploit signals in, for example, tweets. So my sense is that with the advent of machine learning, signals might be changing somehow, both for HFT and non-HFT automated trading systems. So on that background, I guess my first question for Donald is why machine learning doesn't occupy a more important role in the book, and any reflections on that topic would be welcome at least. The next thing I want to discuss then concerns the political parts. This is not so much a question and much less actually a critique. On the contrary, I think Donald is really on the right track here in terms of what he's doing, but I would only encourage perhaps more work in the direction that he's setting out in the book. And this touches much on also the kind of introduction to politics that Donald gave in his introductory comments today. So when he's discussing politics in the book, Donald particularly draws on actor network theory work and John Law and Marie Mull's notion of material politics and about how you can arrange the material world in different ways, and that might have various political effects. Donald also discusses the internal politics of HFT firms, including who has access to the technological infrastructure. Now, I think that ANC and STS scholars have done a lot of valuable work in terms of pointing out ways in which materiality and politics are interrelated. But sometimes I also think that there's a sense in which this very broad notion of politics becomes perhaps too much of an overdone Foucault thing, kind of exaggeration of the idea that power is everywhere, just translated into the statement that politics is everywhere, or more specifically, that everywhere that we have materiality, we also have politics. So when reading such work, or when reading work advocating this kind of position, I sometimes get a kind of nostalgic longing for more classical political science understanding of politics, like Harold Laswell's Who Gets What, When and How. So in that light, I really found it refreshing that Donald engages politics not just in a standard STS way in the book, but also perhaps in a more classical political science way by looking into how party politics in the US has co-shaped the world of automated trading. I think more work in that direction would certainly be very useful. My final comment then concerns the economy. And here Donald makes the argument that however self-evident this might sound, it's important to attend to the actual mundane economic practices of market participants when studying a field like automated trading. Indeed, in the world of automated trading, the mundane is really what matters. Something as mundane as tiny code box or network outage, cleaning data, bird drops, as Donald pointed out earlier, or quickly accessing or responding to order book data. These are all very important parts of HFT. Now, one sociologist who really took a great interest in the mundane aspects of social life is Irving Goffman. And Donna has actually written a very interesting paper on Goffman and the interaction of automated trading. But for some reason, the Goffman analysis has been left out of this new book. I obviously realized that not everything that Donna has written about automated trading is included in the new book. For example, he has also written about dark pools, and dark pools only addressed briefly in the new book. Still, I'm a bit curious about the reasons for leaving out the Goffman analysis. So on the one hand, I see that Goffman might not sit well with a kind of theoretical framework that emphasizes material political economy. On the other hand, and given the emphasis on the mundane aspects of automated trading, and given also that one of the chapters is actually dedicated to interaction dynamics, I couldn't help being a bit surprised to see that Goffman was sort of excluded from the analysis. So my second question to Donald is why this is, how can it be that Goffman was actually left out? I'll end my comments here and once again congratulate Donald on this very exciting and extremely informative book. And as the other commentators, I also really hope that this will be a widely read and widely discussed book. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christian, for your interesting comments. And I guess there will be an interesting debate on these points. And I will pass the word to Robert Seyfert for the last comments, last but not the least, of course. And I would like to thank also Robert for being here today with us.
Yeah, thanks to you, Emiliano and Donald, for being here. I feel very honored. It was also a great pleasure to read the book, I have to say, in preparation for this event. We've been waiting for a long time for it, and it was very exciting to see it in print. Many things have been said that I also wanted to stress. Of course, I wanted to express my admiration for this impressive book, which I think is an absolute must-read for anybody on that topic, not just in financial markets, but also working in the fields of science technology studies and the emerging technologies. So it's very great read. Yeah, so for me, this Trading at the Speed of Light is very many things. It's a book on the history of HFT. It has a specific theory of HFT, I think, and it's, as Christian already said, an incredible detailed empirical analysis. And I always like to think that Donald is probably the one person in the world who knows most about HFT, probably even more than most of these traders, since he has talked to so many of them, including regulators and all different people involved. So the book is very fascinating because it has this really rich empirical material that Christian mentioned, but it's also impressive how Donald never loses control of all this material, which I think is also overwhelming to collect and to keep under control, especially since Donald also has a very complicated concept. It's not just as many books on HFT, a simple story about a technological arms race or a somehow inevitable technological evolution or a technological evolution towards a rise of efficiency, or the opposite story that we sometimes read, where HFT is presented as a rise of the quants and new financial elites that uses illegitimate strategies and brute force technologies to rig the market. So this is very, very different from all these stories, and this is why it's so fascinating. So we have, we all know, of course, and we heard that Donald is an economic sociologist, and that allows him not just to look at the rising efficiencies and improved technologies, but always also to look at the rising inefficiencies and deficiencies, right? We heard about the matter of rain. That probably takes a sociologist to find out, but we also can read the very perplexing reasons why some HFT firms actually stop trading because they're making too much money. So this is something that probably economists would not really find very intuitive, but Donald gives a very good explanation. Well, sometimes they turn off all the machines, simply they're making too much cash. I don't want to go into details. If you want to find out why that is, you should probably read the book. It's a very good story. And we also have, heard Donald being one of the founding member of Science Technology Studies and Social Studies of Finance. And this gives all these influences, especially also his latest move onto political material sociology, makes this book extremely complex. It's very combines political, material, and technological aspects, and then explains the history and the presence of HFT as an intricate socio-technical assemblage, where each of these aspects play an important role, where geographical location plays an important role, political regulation plays an important role, emerging but also reused, recycled technologies play an important role. Donald shows how sometimes the technology doesn't need to be high-tech, can also be old stuff, can be reused, or analog routers for microwave links can be used. Of course, the market microstructure plays an important role, the specificity of electronic exchanges, and the organizational structure of algorithmic trading firms. So this makes this book so complicated because he brings all this together, and also shows how HFT is actually not a single technology or practice, but also emerges very differently. And I think Borch has already touched that in different markets. So HFT is very different in futures and share trading, and very different in trading treasuries. So yeah, I'm very impressed by the details, by everything you can learn in this book, and how it's being like very, very combined and woven together in a very intricate way. I was really very impressed by this. So what I have are 2 points, or 3, depending how much time I have. And these are more impressions that the impressions of the book, where I would like to have Donald's response to this. So reading the book from cover to end makes you feel that this might perhaps be the definite story of HFT. Not just because it's the most complete account, but it also seems to suggest that the end of the speed race might actually end soon. In which case, maybe what Christian mentioned, the machine learning algorithms will play a more important role for high frequency trading. But for this specific type, the low latency trading, it seems from what Donald describes, we might actually be at the end of that development. First, there's some sort of like defensive, hesitating stance towards the speed race. Donald describes very in detail how some of these actors are actually not so excited to invest in this expensive technology, but rather feel like they're being pushed into it. There's the tyranny of the location that Donald mentions. But also, especially at the conclusion of this book, it's a very interesting story where Donald describes how Virtu demands that wireless speed race needs to be curbed. So this is a very interesting argument. If one of the biggest player in high frequency trading landscapes demands to be to include some sort of speed bumps or like some sort of like speed limitations, then that is really a very important statement, and I think it's an incurious statement. So I would like to have Donald elaborate on that, if he thinks that there might be actually an end to this, or rather is slowing down of the speed rate. The other point, the second point that I wanted to make is about what I call the ruins and the remains of HFT. So I need to elaborate on that a little bit. The book is, as I said, also a historical book, tracing the emergence of HFT through different stages, different evolutionary stages. So you have the assemblage of inexpensive computers used by islands. So Donald describes these cables and makeshift constructions to put cheap computers together. Then the next stage is, of course, the geodesic line, the drilling through mountains and laying cables across the country. And then the next step seems to be installation of antennas in order to build a cross-country microwave link. And here I got stuck on this one, or was impressed by this one story about this person, Alex Pilosov, who was in the book the first to create a microwave link. And the interesting part of this is that he did it cheap and fast. So it's not high tech, but he used some quick material to set up this link as fast as possible. And Donald describes how Pilosov also used parts of an old antenna that he brought back into service rather than buy a replacement. So I found this really interesting, that it's this kind of like makeshift construction in a trading practice where you think it's basically rocket science, but it's interesting how it's being patched together like this sometimes. Of course, the main reason for Pilosov was to save money, but I think it's also an interesting story about reuse and appropriation of older technologies that plays an important role in Donald books. And he, how old analog repeaters for microwave links, for instance, have been used. And in that sense, I'm curious about, it came to think about all these technologies and cables and materials that actually being left behind. If you think from the move from the cable, the transatlantic cable, to the microwave link, there will be cables being discarded and left behind. Antennas, servers, computer parts, these thousands of Dell computers of islands will be discarded. So I was wondering if Donald thinks that STS and SF and Social Studies of Finance should also elaborate on these things, on not just the new developments, in blockchain, but also if we should perhaps also pay more attention to the study of the abandoned and the technological ruins. Because when I read that book, always thought about all these things that are being, abandoned, these ruins of HFT, of older historical stages that we are not, or that's not being used anymore. And I think that could be actually a very interesting study to look, and kind of like a historical study of HFT, to look what's behind, what's left behind, which antennas are still somewhere abandoned. So yeah, these are two of my questions. And since I have still a little bit time, I will follow up on Christian's, not complain, but he was missing Goffman. And my question is also, it's something that I was missing in that book, that is, can easily be formulated as what happened to performativity. Since this is an electronic version that I had, I could simply also use the search function, and other than in the literature list, the term performative and performativity did not emerge in a single time. So I was wondering clearly there is performativity happening in that book in many places, but I was wondering why something that Donald, is very famous for, these works on performativity, has been entirely, abandoned. What made Donald decide to not longer include that term? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. And if it's okay for Donald, maybe we could collect other questions, and then Donald will answer to all the questions that we have made. So if there is somebody that would like to ask a question, that you can raise his or her hand and ask the question in the video. Okay, I have a couple of questions, but of course I prefer to give the space to our participants. Okay, so maybe I can ask my question just to break the ice. Thank you, Donna, for your impressive book, of course, and I joined the other speakers by expressing my admiration for your work, and my two questions, which are separate but a bit connected, I would say, are about maybe a less material aspects. So I'll try to be the philosopher here. And the first one is about the quotes, in the sense that in this ultra-fast algo trading, a quote should have still an informational value, in the sense that it should reveal the agent's belief about the correct price of some financial assets. So I was wondering if we call this the epistemic value, if we label this the epistemic value of a quote, I was wondering what is the epistemic value of some form of algo trading. So I'm thinking of quote stuffing, of the practice of placing and canceling an order in terms of milliseconds. And so this form of ultra-fast algo trading maybe doesn't have a real epistemic value. And so in the sense maybe they don't tell something about the belief of financial agents about the correct price of financial assets. And so my first question is about this epistemic or informational value of some forms of ultra-fast algo trading. And the other one is maybe more general, in the sense that maybe we could see ultra-fast algo trading is a double-edged sword, in the sense that it can improve, and it does improve certain functions on financial systems, but it also makes more fragile in a sense. For instance, it improved one of the core functions of financial systems, like price discovery, and so in that sense, it seems very good at it. But on the other hand, it seems that can have some disruptive effects, in the sense that it puts much power, maybe too much power, into the hands of a small group of companies that have a technological edge. And that means that also a small mistake is becoming very expensive or too expensive for companies that doesn't have such technological power. And so maybe these aspects force on us a new responsibility maybe in the use and maybe also in the regulation of algo trading. And so I was curious about your opinion about that. And maybe we have no. So okay. If there is somebody willing to ask a question, you can just speak now.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Donald, for the book and the presentation. So I agree a bit with Emiliano. I mean, it's a common phrase to say that those traders, and especially the fast traders, are like the cynic, the Oscar Wilde cynic, in terms that they know the value of nothing, but just the price. So in a way, is there a parallel that you can make in terms of the automation that we have in society as general, in which once you say that prices are formed by algorithms, and you have, let's say, no consequence, and you try to extricate yourself from the consequences of flash crashes and all the other bad things that could happen, in the same way that that other implementation of algorithms are done in a way to extricate yourself from the responsibility of those decisions as well. So I think that it's an interesting part of the problem of automating trading. And second, and also more to agree with the first question from Emiliano. Thank you.
So thank you, Marcos. And if there are other people willing to ask questions, they can just speak now. Otherwise, we could go with Donald's answers and then see if there are other questions coming up. Thank you, Donald.
Yeah, well, thank you all. And it's a true, thank you all for the many complimentary things you said about the book, which is lovely to hear. And thank you all for those very rich set of questions and comments. And I'm afraid, because I don't want to go on and on and on and on. I'm going to have to be very selective in those that I respond to. One issue that that ties together quite a lot of points is that you both, Robert and Christian, asked me about things that I did not cover in the book, say the Goffman stuff or performativity. It's in part, I think, the issue that Robert himself put his finger on, which is this is already a pretty complicated book. And I did and do hope for a lay readership. And because the topic itself is obviously a complicated kind of topic, that I think demanded from me a certain parsimony in theoretical apparatus. In terms of performativity, for example, there's more to it than that. I mean, because in a certain sense, what I've always seen the performativity thesis as being is an assertion that the tools of economic life matter, that they are material tools. And if one reduces performativity to a thesis of the influence of academic economics on economic life, it's still an interesting thesis. It's still a testable thesis, but it's quite a narrow kind of thesis. So I've always tried to see performativity in a broader sense, but didn't want to use the word for precisely that reason, that it would require quite a lot of explanation, and I just felt that kind of explanation would overburden the book. Christian's point about machine learning, I must admit, worries me a bit, because one possibility, one of the troubles of slow research, is that perhaps as the researcher, your thinking is formed too strongly by interviews that are now quite a long time ago, interviews in 2011, 2012, 2013. So maybe machine learning has grown more important, and I simply did not pick up on that happening. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, it's also possible that there is that we have to differentiate fast carefully, and I was very deliberately working, so to speak, at the ultra fast end of high frequency trading, and it could simply be that machine learning, though used at the ultra fast end as a research tool, as a way of finding signals on which to trade, is not very much used in the actual practice of automated trading, simply because of the time that complex computations take. Either could be true, I'm simply not quite certain which. I mean, one thing though that it is pretty clear that as soon as I started work on online advertising, it became very clear very quickly that this is a field that is structured by machine learning. That machine learning plays a hugely important and very evident role in that field, and that does feel somewhat different from the world of HFT. Marcus's point about morality runs together with Emiliano's point about the epistemic value, or perhaps lack of epistemic value, and with Borch's issue of spoofing, as to my mind a very fascinating topic. And spoofing is interesting precisely because the crackdown on spoofing is as it were, a moralization of trading, an imposition of moral categories. And they're moral categories that in a certain sense evoke what Emiliano has to say about the epistemic nature of quotes, the intuition, which is in part, I think, a moral intuition, that in putting a price quote into a market, one should be, as it were, saying something about the value. One should be making a bona fide kind of statement. One should not simply be putting in a price quote for opportunistic kinds of reasons. Now, of course, that's an eminently contestable moral framework, but it is a moral framework that has informed the crackdown on spoofing, and it's a very interestingly processual business, the crackdown on spoofing, because in some cases that moral instinct is there, but it's just there in the background in a sort of, a pervasive sense that this is an activity that's morally dubious. In other cases, it's led to jail sentences. Even in the US, different markets vary very much in the extent to which spoofing is in fact criminalized. It's essentially been criminalized only in futures trading and criminalized only in the United States, and not in other countries. And it would take me far too much time to explain the process, but it's kind of processual. And That's, of course, one of the issues that lies behind, Daniel's fascinating observation about automation being a utopian project. And that's actually, in a sense, I think, clearest in the case of Bitcoin. Now, of course, we don't really know who Satoshi Nakamoto was or is, and therefore not even with certainty that they're still alive. But I would kind of suspect they would be a little bit shocked that Bitcoin mining now consumes as much electricity as a small country does. There's a kind of processional unwinding that's gone on there, and there's no sense that I've got that was at all anticipated by Satoshi Nakamoto, even though it was only 13 years ago that the original white paper was published. And it's one of the things that makes the social sciences so interesting, but also so difficult and so challenging, is that those processes are pretty damn complicated things, and getting a good understanding of them is very difficult. Christian mentioned the possibility that the book left no stone unturned, but I don't think he wasn't asserting that, and certainly that's not what I would assert. And I think Bohee puts her finger on not just one stone, but a whole host of stones that would benefit from being turned over. I decided, for practical reasons, to concentrate only on United States and Europe. And the South Korea, she said, an interesting case. There's India, a completely fascinating case. I mean, I must admit that my prejudice about India, people from India talk about the license Raj, all the paperwork that's needed to set up a new enterprise. And I had I realized, subconsciously assumed that the incumbents in stock trading in India would be able to keep high frequency trading out. But far from it. And there is a very active high frequency trading sphere in India. So I think one image I have there is of high frequency trading as a tracer die. When you want to, you want to see where the water from a stream ends up. You pour dye, colored dye, into the water so you can see where it gets to and where it doesn't get to. I think in a certain sense we can consider high frequency trading like that. We can consider it as a kind of tracer die. It flows into some places, for example, into the treasuries market, into the trading of the sovereign bonds of the United States, but not into the trading of the sovereign bonds of Italy, for example, the world's, I think, third biggest sovereign bond market, not into the trading of the sovereign bonds of the United Kingdom. So many stones remaining to be turned. Thank you.
So thank you, Donna, for your answer. I don't know if there are other questions. Maybe we could go on, or feel free to stop here. I mean, as you wish, Donald.
I think I'd certainly want to at least pause to hear what, if there are other questions or comments. But while people are thinking, I'll go through the notes I've been taking. Okay, well, since, unless I'm missing something, I'll take up some other particularly interesting issues. One was one of the very first paradoxes, conundrums that Daniel brought up, which is that the atomization that's involved in high frequency trading, in the sense of the breaking up of orders into not big orders, but breaking them up into tiny little orders for algorithmic execution, nonetheless produces crowd phenomena. And that, of course, is one of the main themes of the Copenhagen business schools work, Christian's work, Bohe's work, their other colleagues, work, and that's I think truly fascinating work, because a natural image, I always thought that our colleague Juan Pablo Pardaguera would use this as a title of a paper or a book, but as far as I know, he's not actually used this as a final title of anything, but it's from crowds to queues, and because that's, in a sense, that's what you would expect, so to speak, the move from the crowd of the trading floor to the electronic queue of the limit order book. But a priori, there do indeed seem to be crowd phenomena, crowd behavior among algorithms. I mean, perhaps there's a slightly deeper reason why I didn't take the Goffman point forward into the book. It's that methodologically, of course, what I am doing in the book, and what I did in the research, was to use my human informants as informants on the behavior of algorithms. And I'm perfectly well aware that that's a methodologically limited approach. So the kind of thing that Christian and his colleagues are doing, taking ethnographic results and using them to build artificial agents and seeing how those artificial agents interact, seems to be methodologically what one would have to do to take the Goffman notion of interaction order and apply it to trading algorithms in a truly wholehearted way. I haven't done that myself, and I'm very glad that you are doing it. A smaller point, in a certain sense, the ruins of HFT, what's left behind. I think Robert's quite right on that, that the old matters. There's an excellent book whose author's name I'm blanking on at the moment. It's called The Shock of the Old. It's about the surprisingly important role of old technologies. And that's very interesting. And one of the things it took me a while to accept was really serious, and HFT was microwaves. Precisely for that reason, I thought of microwaves as an old and physically vulnerable technology. It took me a while to realize that they really were seriously being used. But what's left behind is fascinating. I mean, I actually as you'll know from the fact that it's the first photograph in the book, I just love the fact that the island sign was still there on Broad Street many years after. And at one point you can actually go up the steps that are shown in the photograph and peer in through the glass and even see some of the equipment. It was because it was a kind of TV studio, so you could see some of the equipment. So what's left behind is important. And then thirdly, and I'll end on this, Emiliano's point about too much power, perhaps, in the hands of a small group of companies. And that seems to me to be a very real and very valid concern in relation to high frequency trading, because of course, one of the things I have witnessed through the 10 years in which I studied it is the industry shrinking. Firms going out of business, and the new entrants. There's really essentially, as far as I know, only been 2 new entrants of any scale: Headlands Technologies and XTX Markets, whereas 6 or 7 substantial players have gone out of business. It's possible, the Financial Times says this without real documentation, but it's possible that 40% of all US stock trading is now done by just 2 firms, Virtu, which has already been mentioned, and Citadel. That's not 40% of HFT, that's 40% of all US stock trading. And I have to confess, I wish I'd thought of this idea myself, but I didn't. Stefan Tisch, who's an important player in this area, was the person who drew my attention to this. It's possible that there is a material route to the increased concentration within HFT, which is that the trouble with speed races is not simply that they are expensive, and they are indeed very expensive, but they can have winners consistently so. And that may be related, the material feature of systems that may be exacerbating that is the growing determinism of exchanges, computer systems, the reduction in jitter, the reduction in quasi-random fluctuation in processing time, because of course in a jittery system, the 2nd fastest firm, or perhaps the 10th fastest firm even, can still get to the trade sometimes. But as determinism grows, then perhaps the speed race has a consistent winner or a very small group of consistent winners, and perhaps that's part of the process that is leading to what Emiliano rightly points to, the potential for far too much market power being concentrated in the hands of a small group of companies. That's it.
Thank you, Donald. I guess we have a question from Robert. I see his hands raised.
Yeah, thanks. On that note, I wanted to ask you, again on this, what I asked you before, the question of the end of the speed race. I mean, elaborating that what you just said, one could also possibly think that the remaining 2 players come to some sort of an agreement to avoid competition, as sometimes happens in the market. Mm-hmm. And you have, as I said, I have the impression in your book that you somehow describe that some players seem to avoid further competition. So my question would be, is that impression in the book correct, that you think there might be some sort of evasion of competition, or like a tendency to avoid further escalations?
Yeah, and very, 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 very interesting. As far as I can tell, the direct measures to curb the speed race, like asymmetric speed bumps, or Buttigieg's proposal for a move to discrete, albeit very, very frequent, but still discrete point in time actions, auctions, I beg your pardon. Those are still, as it were, clustered on the periphery, so to speak. So the products and the markets where those have been introduced are not in the central markets for shares or futures. Their largest concentration, actually, of them, interestingly enough, is in the foreign exchange market. And almost bizarrely, that's because the foreign exchange market is the most lightly regulated of all the markets covered in the book, because of the transnational nature of foreign exchange. And that leaves the operators of, they're not actually literally exchanges in the registered sense, the operators of trading venues in foreign exchange, able more freely to experiment with those kind of measures. And the politics of that market is that the big banks, with their slow, vulnerable systems, remain very important in foreign exchange trading. So the politics there inclines to favor measures to restrict the advantages that speed brings. But in the heartlands of HFT, the trading of futures, of shares, and the interdealer treasuries market, measures to restrict the speed race are still large. They're important initiatives, but still largely peripheral initiatives. I would suspect that Virtu and Citadel will be very careful indeed not to engage in the kind of behavior that would lead to antitrust litigation. So I don't imagine that there are emails, as it were, running between Virtu's New York office and Citadel's headquarters in Chicago, saying, "Hey, you know, why don't you stop doing this, and we'll stop doing it too, and then we'll both be better off." I think that will not happen. Whether, of course, though, you can get tacit coordination, whether that will evolve, whether, because in a certain sense, the speed race has a characteristic of repeated game of prisoner's dilemma. You know, whether one firm will, you know, just slacken off a bit and see whether the other firms slacken off, and if they do, you know, you could imagine that happening. And market concentration, you don't have to be a rabid free marketeer to say that a high degree of market concentration is a difficult and dangerous thing. And another of the instant lessons of studying online advertising is there, of course, you have a phenomenally concentrated market, huge market share, to some extent Facebook, but overwhelmingly Google. And you can just see there how, once market power comes into being, how deeply entrenched it can get and how very difficult it can be to shift it.
Well, thank you very much, Donald. And yeah, I mean, I guess we have time for the last question, if there is somebody willing to ask. And okay, I see Marcos.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So So, Donald, I think that we met once in New York when you were attending the Quantopian seminar.
Oh yeah, the Quantopian seminar, Marcos. Wow, wow.
And so it's
Yeah.
interesting. So it's interesting to notice that. So Quantopian was okay. Everyone should be able to try and become an algorithm trader, but then it's probably fizzle out. But now we see that let's say the non-algorithmic but coordinated trading is probably making more noise in the markets than let's say the hordes of algorithm traders ever did. So is it something that, let's say that so is there kind of limits in terms of to what algorithm trading can do, and also we can see that even that, I mean, they are probably now adapting. They'll have to adapt to. I mean, I'm finishing a thesis on microstructures, so I would describe it as the kind of the death of the what we would call the noise traders, in terms that there are no. It's kind of a naive, perhaps, to imagine that in let's say the main markets, most of the trading comes from uninformed retail and independent orders. And now perhaps you are dealing with a new normal of, okay, I can still kind of predict markets, but I am predicting much more coordinated markets, and therefore this might be even easier.
Yeah. No, great question, and apologies. Very different context from because the Quantopian is, for those who don't know, it was, because I think they basically shut up shop now, system that made it possible for someone with a PhD in a quantitative subject but no particular financial background to try developing a nice test environment where you could try developing an idea for algorithmic trading and see whether it made money in the test environment. Maybe say a couple of things there. One actually is in relation to machine learning, that one of the most interesting conversations I had with somebody at Quantopian is about how they chose the algorithms that they would back with their capital to trade, because that was part of the promise of it. If your algorithm performs well on the test data, then they would put money behind it to trade it for real and give you a portion of the profits. It turned out that they didn't simply back whatever algorithm was making the most money on the test data. What they looked at was whether the developer of the algorithm could explain to them why the algorithm was making money. In other words, they were looking for the economic intuition behind the algorithm. And I asked them why they did that. And they said, what they said is that they had discovered that if the developer could not explain what the algorithm was doing, then it was almost always a case of overfitting. So one of the deep problems of algorithmic trading is, of course, and your colleague, the other Christian, has written interestingly about overfitting in algorithmic trading. And I just found that rather interesting. The fact that you had to be able to tell a story about your algorithm so as to persuade people it wasn't simply overfitting to the the test data. The other thing that you very interestingly say, Marcos, and I would really, I'm not currently doing interviews in this field, but if I was, I would certainly want, if I possibly could, to ask people in the wholesaler firms, particularly in the United States, the firms such as Citadel, by far the biggest, and Virtu, that as well as trading in the open markets, execute against the orders of retail traders. And of course, that's historically been a very attractive business because, as you say, historically, there's a certain kind of statistical independence. There's a certain level of just noise in retail trading. So it's not like you might be trading against BlackRock, let's say, where the first set of the first order for 100 shares might be the predecessor of another 100,000 orders for 100 shares in the same direction, and you're going to, as a market maker would put it, get run over very badly by the big institutional investor. There was a kind of confidence that retail would not run you over, and whether that confidence has been dented by the game shop and and the other famous episodes of the last few months, and what measures the market making firms are taking to protect themselves. I mean, one would assume, and this is Christian's point about alternative data, one would presume that they will very quickly have written programs to examine sentiment on Reddit, so as to discover when the next game shop episode might be about to hit them.
So thank you, Donald, again. And yeah, maybe if we have time, I have another question for you. I don't know if, and it's about the behavior of algo trading you were mentioning before. And so my question is about the resulting of interaction of algos. And there are niches where it seems that the interaction of conflicting, of course, algos results in a characteristic behavior of up and down movement in prices. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, that's curious because it seems that they don't stabilize the market in a sense, but they present dynamics where, in a sense, they look, using a slogan, more human than human, and more human than humans, in the sense that the price goes up and down, like greed and fear. It's a sequence of greed and fear, which are the basic instincts of humans. And so maybe maybe it's a bit counterintuitive, maybe that maybe this has to do with performative, in the sense that or counter-performative aspects of the use of algo trading. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, a very interesting question. I think, as far as I can see, there are issues of time scale involved there. That, for sure, yes. Performativity, counter-performativity, the performative or counter-performative role of models such as Black-Scholes, I think those are present. Those have been present, but typically working out over quite protracted timescales. At sort of medium time scales, my reading of the economics literature in HFT is that it does indeed generally seem to be the case that most of the time what HFT does is to dampen down volatility in markets. But then there's fascinating work by Neil Johnson, who's a physicist, I think, and colleagues. Quite an old paper now. It's called something like A New Machine Ecology at sub-millisecond scale. But I know that Christian Borch knows, because that's one of the first papers to talk about interactions among crowds of algorithms, and what they find empirically is indeed that sort of sawtooth kind of movement that you mentioned, but clearly because now we're at very short time scales, even the most emotionally unstable human being doesn't change their emotions within milliseconds. So clearly it is not human emotions that are driving the sawtooth pattern. It would indeed seem to be interactions among algorithms, and one of the reasons I so much welcome what Christian and his colleagues are doing is the hope that the agent-based modeling out of Copenhagen will throw new light on those patterns of interaction.
Thank you, Donald. And I don't know if maybe if there are not other questions, we would stop here. And thanks again, Donald, all the discussants and the participants for being here at the first meeting of Finance Online Seminars. And we are planning other meetings, and so I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Emiliano, and let me add my huge thanks to you for organising it, and once again to Bohi, to Robert, to Christian, and to Daniel for those insightful, generous, and thought-provoking comments. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.